At my granddaughter's lavish wedding, I sat alone, overhearing whispers calling me the absent grandma. Then her mother, my son's widow, Melanie, whispered about me. She was never there when it mattered anyway. My hand tightened on the tablecloth. They had no idea the truth of my silent sacrifices, or the promise I made. This is my story. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from. The air shimmered with an unbearable opulence, a stark contrast to the quiet ache in Eleanor's chest. Crystal chandeliers glittered above, casting sparkling light across tables laden with flowers and fine china. Her granddaughter Clara's wedding reception was a testament to wealth and grandeur, a world Eleanor felt utterly alien to. She sat at a small, peripheral table, a forgotten corner of the vast ballroom, nursing a glass of lukewarm champagne. Her sensible navy dress felt like a uniform in a sea of silks and designer gowns. She felt like an uninvited ghost at her own flesh-and-blood celebration. A ripple of hushed voices drifted from a nearby table, carried by a stray current of air. "Who's that old woman sitting alone?" a female voice inquired, light and curious. Another voice, more cynical, responded, "Oh, that's Clara's grandmother." From Michael's side, "The absent grandma, they call her. Never around." Eleanor's grip tightened on her champagne flute, the delicate glass threatening to shatter in her hand. Absent grandma. The words pierced through her, sharper than any knife. They echoed the very lie she had agreed to live. 15 years ago, the world had fractured the day her son Michael died. A sudden, senseless accident that left a gaping wound in Eleanor's life, and an even larger void in Clara's. Michael had been her only child, her joy, her reason. On his deathbed, his eyes already dimming, he had squeezed her hand and whispered, "Promise me, Mom. Promise you'll look after Clara. Make sure she gets everything she needs." Eleanor had promised, her voice thick with tears and a mother's eternal devotion. She promised him she would ensure Clara achieved her dream of becoming a doctor, no matter the cost. The cost had been everything. Every penny of her modest retirement savings had been emptied. Her cozy home, filled with memories of Michael's childhood, had been sold, the proceeds funneled directly into Clara's future. She moved into a cramped apartment, sacrificing her last comfort. To make up the shortfall, Eleanor took on multiple part-time jobs. An early morning shift at a bakery, cleaning offices in the evenings, even babysitting for neighbors. Her hands, once soft, became calloused and arthritic. Her back ached constantly, a dull throb that was a constant companion. She poured her entire being, her very essence, into ensuring Clara had the best education, the finest opportunities, completely unaware of the truth behind the seemingly endless stream of funds. A shadow fell over her table. Eleanor looked up to see Clara, radiant in her white gown, smiling politely. "Grandma Eleanor," Clara said, her voice warm but tinged with a formality that always stung. "Thank you so much for coming. And for the lovely gift." Clara's eyes briefly met hers, a fleeting moment of connection before drifting towards the bustling crowd. She had no idea the lovely gift was a fraction of the pension Eleanor now scraped by on, a symbolic gesture compared to the years of sacrifice. Standing a few feet behind Clara, observing them with a thin, almost imperceptible frown, was Melanie, Clara's mother, Michael's widow. Melanie's eyes, cold and assessing, watched Eleanor like a hawk. When Clara turned to speak to someone else, Melanie leaned in, her voice a venomous hiss that somehow carried directly to Eleanor's ears over the din of the celebration. "Don't worry about her," Melanie whispered to a relative, her lip curling slightly. She was never there when it mattered anyway. The cruel words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Her fingers, already tense, now clutched the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles turned white. The architect of this painful charade, Eleanor remembered the tearful meeting after Michael's funeral, when Melanie, overwhelmed and financially strained, had confessed she couldn't afford Clara's dream medical school. Eleanor had offered everything, every resource she possessed. Melanie had agreed, but with a caveat. "Clara can never know, Eleanor," she had insisted. "She needs to think she earned it all herself, through scholarships, grants, or maybe, Melanie had added, a calculating glint in her eyes. She could believe it comes from Richard. My new husband. He's very generous. Eleanor had swallowed her pride, her mother's heart overriding any personal hurt. For Clara, she would be invisible. For Clara, she would suffer the indignity of being the absent grandma. The promise was a silent burden, a secret pact that ate away at her soul. Now, hearing Melanie's dismissive words, Eleanor wondered if the price of keeping her word had been too high. Was being labeled the absent grandma a fair exchange for ensuring Clara's success? Years of silent sacrifice, of hidden pain, crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She had given up her home, her financial security, her very identity, all for a granddaughter who now thanked her formally and whose mother openly dismissed her contributions. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. Eleanor watched Clara glide back into the heart of the celebration, a radiant bride surrounded by laughter and well wishes. Clara was oblivious, enveloped in her beautiful, successful life, built on a foundation of lies and Eleanor's unseen labor. The pain of being perceived as absent, of being judged and dismissed, despite having given absolutely everything, was almost unbearable. Was this truly the right decision? Had she done the right thing by honoring Melanie's twisted agreement? The lavish setting, all glittering lights and joyous music, served only to highlight the desolate emptiness inside Eleanor. Her struggles, her silent contributions, were hidden beneath layers of fabric and polite smiles, a secret that felt heavier than the weight of the world itself. The morning light, usually a gentle comfort, felt harsh and unforgiving. Eleanor sat at her small kitchen table, the silence of her modest apartment deafening after the opulent clamor of the wedding. Her body ached, not just from the uncomfortable hotel bed, but from the cumulative weight of 15 years of sacrifice. The words absent grandma still echoed in her mind, a relentless drumbeat against her skull. The pain was more profound than any physical discomfort. It was the ache of invisibility, of being erased from a life she had secretly built. Her gaze drifted to the framed photograph on the refrigerator. Clara, beaming in her white wedding dress, her arm linked with her new husband. Eleanor had taken the photo herself. From a discreet distance, a secret snapshot to cling to. It brought back the sting of Melanie's cutting whisper, the memory of her own quiet despair. She closed her eyes, and the memories flowed back, sharp and vivid, to Michael's funeral 15 years prior. The day was a blur of grief for Eleanor, a raw wound. But Melanie, dressed in tasteful black, had seemed remarkably composed. Her face was pale, yes, but her eyes held a determined glint. Just a week after they had laid Michael to rest, Melanie had called Eleanor, asking her to come over. Eleanor, still numb with sorrow, had found Melanie sitting at their kitchen table, a stack of papers neatly organized before her. Eleanor. Melanie had begun, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. I've been thinking about Clara's future. My parents have offered for us to move to Connecticut. It's closer to them, and the schools there are excellent. There are so many more opportunities. Eleanor remembered the shock that had run through her. Connecticut? But Michael loved it here. Clara loves her school. Her friends. This is her home, Melanie. She's just lost her father. She needs stability. Eleanor's voice had been weak, trembling, her own grief making her powerless. She wanted Clara close, a living memory of Michael, a reason to keep going. Melanie's expression had hardened, a mask of resolve settling over her features. Michael is gone, Eleanor. And while I mourn him deeply, I have to think about what's best for Clara now. Her future is my priority. The words had been delivered with such chilling finality that Eleanor felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. What was best for Clara in Melanie's mind, Eleanor realized with a crushing certainty, was distance. Distance from this familiar, comfortable, but ultimately middle-class life. Distance from Eleanor. Back in her small kitchen, Eleanor took a sip of lukewarm coffee from her chipped Mother's Day mug, a gift from Michael years ago. Around her, on every available surface, were more photographs of Clara. Clara at her high school graduation, smiling brightly, clutching a diploma. Clara at a university ball, dressed in a stunning gown. Clara on a summer internship, in scrubs, every single one, a reminder of an event Eleanor had not attended, a moment she had only seen captured in still images, shared weeks later by Melanie with a brief, almost clinical update. She remembered the day Clara called her, voice bubbling with excitement. "Grandma, I got into medical school. Can you believe it?" Mom says it was all her networking and Richard's connections. Eleanor had to feign surprise, her heart sinking even as she congratulated Clara. She had received the tuition bill 2 weeks earlier, a staggering sum that made her breath catch. That bill was already paid, transferred from her dwindling savings, supplemented by the extra hours she pulled cleaning offices and folding laundry at the dry cleaners. Richard Thorne, Melanie's second husband. Eleanor had met him only twice, brief, uncomfortable encounters. He was a tall man with a perpetually condescending smile, his eyes always appraising, never quite kind. He had a way of calling her Mom, a forced, possessive term that made Eleanor's skin crawl. He wasn't Michael's father, he wasn't her son, and his faux familiarity felt like a deliberate act of territoriality, a subtle way of reminding her of her peripheral status. The terms of the financial arrangement had been laid out by Melanie with absolute clarity, just before Clara started medical school. "Eleanor," Melanie had said, her tone firm, "I appreciate your help, truly, but I don't want Clara feeling obligated to you. I don't want her life complicated by divided loyalties. She needs to focus on her studies, not on who paid for them. It's best if she believes it's all from scholarships, grants, and, of course, Richard's generosity." Eleanor had agreed, her heart aching. She told herself that some distant presence was better than none. She held on to a fragile hope that one day, Melanie would soften, that Clara would eventually understand. She believed that as Clara grew older, wiser, she would instinctively know. But instead, the distance grew. The calls from Clara dwindled to occasional texts, and Melanie, Eleanor learned through whispers and veiled comments, constantly reminded Clara of Eleanor's missed birthdays, holidays, and milestones. Eleanor had become the convenient villain, the absent grandmother. While she worked multiple jobs, her body aching, her spirit weary, to keep the money flowing to Connecticut. Every late night, every aching muscle, every skipped meal was for Clara. She picked up the photo of Clara in her crisp white lab coat, stethoscope draped around her neck. Clara, the doctor. A wave of bittersweet pride washed over Eleanor. She traced the outline of Clara's smiling face with a trembling finger. "It was worth it," she whispered to the silent apartment. A desperate reaffirmation. Every single sacrifice. But even as she said the words, a tiny seed of doubt, planted by years of Melanie's manipulation and her own isolation, began to sprout. 2 days after the wedding, Eleanor was still grappling with the emotional aftermath, the quiet sting of Melanie's words, and the burden of her secret. Her small apartment felt emptier than usual. Suddenly, her phone rang, startling her. It was Melanie. A rare occurrence, indeed. Melanie usually only called when a new tuition bill arrived, or when some unexpected opportunity for Clara required a fresh infusion of cash. Eleanor answered, a prickle of unease already forming. "Eleanor." Melanie's voice was sharp, tinged with a brittle anxiety that was uncharacteristic. "It's Clara. She's in the hospital. Appendicitis. They're taking her in for surgery now." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Appendicitis, surgery, Clara. All other thoughts evaporated. "Which hospital?" "I'm coming." She didn't even pause to consider the logistics or the cost. "What?" Melanie's voice rose in pitch. "No, there's no need for you to come all this way. It's just a routine procedure. Daniel is here, and my parents are flying in. You don't have to." "I'm coming, Melanie," Eleanor asserted, her voice firm, unwavering. A quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed welled up within her. "She's my granddaughter. I'll be there." And with a click, Eleanor hung up, a rare, deliberate act of defiance against Melanie's control. She felt a surge of adrenaline, fueled by worry and a fierce, maternal protectiveness that had been dormant for too long. 6 grueling hours later, After frantically booking an exorbitant last-minute flight and enduring a bewildering series of transfers, Eleanor arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital. The building loomed, intimidating and vast. Her clothes were rumpled, her hair disheveled, and her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. At the information desk, a crisp, efficient receptionist looked at her with polite disdain. "I'm here to see Clara Hayes," Eleanor stated, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Family only," the receptionist said, her eyes flicking over Eleanor's tired appearance. "Are you on the approved visitor list?" Before Eleanor could explain, a familiar face appeared beside her. It was Daniel, Clara's new husband. He looked tired but surprisingly relieved to see her. "Grandma Eleanor? I'm so glad you're here." He gestured for her to follow him, bypassing the receptionist's scrutiny. He led her down a labyrinthine corridor, the hospital air thick with the scent of antiseptic and underlying anxiety. They found Clara in a recovery room, still groggy from anesthesia. She looked small, vulnerable, her face pale against the white hospital sheets. Eleanor's heart twisted with a familiar ache. This was her flesh and blood, her Michael's daughter. She gently approached the bed and took Clara's hand. It was soft, warm. "I'm here, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion, tears pricking at her eyes. Just then, the door swung open, and Melanie strode in, her face a mask of carefully controlled irritation. She looked as immaculate as ever, not a single hair out of place. Her eyes immediately landed on Eleanor, cold and accusing. "What are you doing here, Eleanor? I told you it wasn't necessary." Eleanor straightened up, refusing to shrink under Melanie's gaze. "She's my granddaughter, Melanie. I wanted to see her." Melanie gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "Daniel's parents are already making arrangements for a private nurse. We have everything under control. Your presence just complicates things." Her tone implied Eleanor was a burden, an unwanted intrusion. "Besides, you've had minimal contact with Clara for years. Suddenly showing up now seems a little dramatic, don't you think?" A spark ignited in Eleanor's chest. The years of swallowing her pride, of enduring Melanie's veiled insults, flashed before her. The exhaustion, the worry for Clara, and the injustice of it all finally cracked her composure. "Don't rewrite history, Melanie," Eleanor retorted, her voice low but firm. "Not today. Not when Clara is lying here." The unexpected sharpness in Eleanor's voice seemed to hang in the air. Just then, Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked, her gaze hazy, then focused on the two women. "Mom? Grandma Pat?" Clara's voice was a whisper, weak and raspy. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor stepped closer. "Just making sure you're all right, my love." "You came all the way from Arizona?" Clara asked, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "That must have cost a fortune." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Don't you worry about that, sweetheart. Just focus on getting better." The cost of the flight, the sacrifice of her last few dollars, meant nothing compared to seeing Clara's face. Daniel re-entered the room, followed by a soft-spoken nurse carrying a clipboard. Eleanor instinctively stepped back, giving them space. As she did, her gaze fell upon Clara's small hospital bag, placed on the bedside table. A corner of a document protruded from the open flap. It had a familiar letterhead, University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. A strange premonition washed over Eleanor. Slowly, almost magnetically, she reached into the bag and pulled out the document. It was a financial statement, a tuition receipt. Her eyes scanned the details, her heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. And there it was, stark and undeniable, in bold letters. Payee. Eleanor Hayes. The amount. $43,000. Clara was never supposed to know. Melanie had sworn it. Melanie's eyes, following Eleanor's gaze, widened in alarm. With a gasp, she lunged forward, snatching the receipt from Eleanor's trembling hand, her face a mask of panic and fury. The truth, carefully hidden for 15 years, was suddenly exposed, hanging between them like a fragile, dangerous web. The tuition receipt, snatched so violently from Eleanor's hand, crumpled in Melanie's grasp. Melanie's eyes, usually so composed, now darted wildly between Eleanor, Clara, and the incriminating document. A strangled sound escaped her throat, a desperate attempt to regain control. Clara, her voice still weak but clear, picked up on the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she looked at her mother, then at Eleanor. "Grandma," she asked, her gaze fixed on the crumpled paper in Melanie's hand. "Why does that receipt have your name on it?" The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The nurse, sensing the escalating tension, offered a sympathetic glance and quietly slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Melanie, recovering slightly, quickly moved to dismiss the evidence. "It's a mix-up, Clara. A clerical error, darling. Hospitals make mistakes all the time." Her voice was a strained attempt at casualness, but a tremor betrayed her. Daniel, however, was not so easily swayed. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, had already registered the bold numbers on the receipt. "A clerical error for $43,000, Melanie." His tone was incredulous, cutting through Melanie's flimsy excuse. He looked at Eleanor, then back at the receipt, a dawning comprehension in his eyes. Eleanor met Clara's gaze, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. 15 years of silence, 15 years of being the absent grandma, 15 years of keeping a painful secret, were about to unravel, not by her choice, but by a carelessly placed piece of paper. The relief and terror warred within her. This was it. "Grandma?" Clara asked again, her voice stronger now, a hint of steel beneath the weakness. She looked directly at Eleanor, bypassing Melanie's frantic denials. "Did you pay for my medical school?" All three pairs of eyes. Clara's questioning, Daniel's curious, Melanie's panicked. Fixed on Eleanor. She took a deep breath. The truth finally finding its voice after years of suppression. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Yes, I did." Clara's face registered a profound confusion. "But Mom always said it was from scholarships, and some from Richard. She said he was so generous." Eleanor glanced at Melanie, whose face was now ashen. "It was an arrangement," Eleanor explained, choosing her words carefully. "I provided the money for your tuition, for your living expenses, for everything you needed for medical school. But it was agreed that you would believe it came from scholarships, grants, or from Richard." Daniel stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Melanie. "An arrangement? What kind of arrangement is that, Melanie?" Melanie, finding her voice, tried to shut down the conversation. "This is not the time, Daniel. Clara just had surgery. She needs rest, not this." Her attempt to play the concerned mother fell flat, tainted by her obvious panic. But Clara wasn't letting go. The truth, even in fragments, was too compelling. "No, Mom. I need to know. Please, Grandma. Tell me everything." Clara looked at Eleanor, her eyes pleading. Eleanor moved to Clara's side, taking her hand again. She looked into her granddaughter's eyes, seeing not just the confusion, but a glimmer of hurt, of betrayal. "After your father, Michael, passed away," Eleanor began, her voice soft, recalling the profound grief that had shattered her world. "Your mother, Melanie, decided to move you both to Connecticut, to be closer to her parents, for better opportunities," she said. "I wanted you to stay, Clara," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "To be close to me, in the home Michael grew up in." But Melanie was insistent. She said she needed to think about what was best for you, and that meant leaving our old life behind. Eleanor paused, taking another breath. "The condition for my financial help, the condition for me helping you achieve your dream of becoming a doctor, was that I remain unseen, unknown." She explained how Melanie had systematically pushed her out of Clara's life. "Every time I tried to visit, Melanie would fill your schedule with activities. Playdates, ballet lessons, piano practice, so there was never time for me. Then, she would tell you I missed your recitals, your birthdays, your graduations. Events I was never invited to. Events I was told specifically not to attend, to maintain the facade. Melanie finally spoke, her voice strained. That's not true. I never explicitly told you not to come. We just had different priorities, but her denial lacked conviction, her gaze fixed on the floor. Eleanor looked from Melanie to Clara, then back at Melanie. Melanie made it very clear. Clara, my role was to be the financial support. Nothing more. No active grandmother, no presence in your life. That, Eleanor concluded, her voice hollow, was our arrangement. Clara's eyes, wide with disbelief and hurt, slowly turned to Melanie. Mom, she whispered, her voice cracking. Is this true? Did you really do that? Melanie could not meet her daughter's gaze. Her silence, the way she kept her eyes fixed on the hospital floor, was all the confirmation Clara needed. The truth, raw and painful, had finally unraveled. This story is far from over. If you're finding yourself gripped by this unfolding drama, make sure you don't miss a single moment. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to stay updated. Now, let's get back to the heart of the truth. The hospital room was charged with unspoken accusations and raw emotion. Daniel, his face grim, turned to Eleanor. How much did you contribute, Eleanor? To Clara's entire education? His voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension that belied his calm. Eleanor hesitated, looking at Clara, whose eyes were wide with shock and a dawning realization. Grandma, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. I need to know. All of it. Eleanor took a deep breath. The dam, which had held back the truth for so long, had fully broken. Everything, she stated, her voice trembling slightly. Tuition, housing, books, living expenses, from undergraduate all the way through medical school. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Clara gasped, a horrified sound that tore at Eleanor's heart. Hundreds of thousands? But how? I thought you were enjoying your retirement, traveling. The image Clara had of Eleanor was one of comfortable leisure, not of a woman sacrificing everything. I sold my house, Clara, Eleanor explained, her voice thick with emotion. The house Michael grew up in. I emptied out my entire retirement account. And I came out of retirement. I've been working 3 jobs for most of the past 15 years. Her gaze flickered to Melanie, whose face was a mixture of shame and fury. Melanie, ever defensive, quickly interjected. Your grandmother made her choices, Clara. She chose to give up her home, her retirement. She could have been more present if she'd wanted to be. No one forced her. Her words were a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, to paint Eleanor as a willing martyr. But Eleanor had endured Melanie's manipulations for far too long. 15 years of suppressed frustration, of silent suffering, finally erupted. That is a lie, Melanie, and you know it. Eleanor's voice, usually quiet and gentle, cracked with a force that made both Clara and Daniel jump. She turned to Melanie, her eyes blazing. You made your terms explicit. I was to stay in the background. My money was to be anonymous. You said I would complicate your new family dynamic, your new life with Richard. You systematically blocked every attempt I made to be a part of Clara's life. Then you painted me as the absent grandma. Eleanor then turned back to Clara, her anger subsiding, replaced by a profound sadness. Clara's face was streaked with tears. I never wanted you to feel guilty. Sweetheart, I never wanted you to feel torn. I only wanted to ensure you had every single opportunity to achieve your dream. Your father. Michael. He made me promise. Clara's voice was a choked sob. So, you sacrificed your entire life? And you let me believe you just didn't care enough to be there? The raw pain in Clara's question was almost unbearable. Eleanor reached out, gently touching Clara's arm. It seemed like the only option at the time, my love, given Melanie's conditions. Daniel, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke. He looked at Melanie, then at Eleanor, a bewildered expression on his face. So, You, he said, indicating Eleanor, sold your home, worked into your 70s, gave away hundreds of thousands of dollars, and let other people take credit for it. All while, he turned his gaze sharply to Melanie. You kept her away from her own granddaughter? Melanie, cornered, tried one last defense. Eleanor was emotional, sometimes unstable after Michael's death. I needed to provide Clara with stability. She had a new father figure in Richard. I was just trying to do what was best. Her voice was weak, her arguments crumbling. Stop it! Clara cried out, her voice ragged with anguish. Just stop it! Both of you! She looked from Eleanor to Melanie, her eyes swimming with tears. The only stability I got was believing my grandma didn't want me, that she just disappeared. Her gaze hardened as it landed on Melanie. How could you, Mom? How could you keep her from me, and then make me believe it was her choice, that she simply didn't care? Melanie's composure finally cracked. She hunched her shoulders, her face collapsing. It was difficult. Clara, everything was difficult after Michael died. I wanted a fresh start. For us. Her excuses were feeble, transparent. Selfish, Clara accused, her voice filled with a profound hurt. You were selfish, Mom. You deprived me of my grandmother's presence, her love, her sacrifice. For what? So you could pretend Richard was some kind of hero? Daniel, seeing the scene spiraling, stepped in, placing a calming hand on Clara's shoulder. Clara, you need to rest. Everyone needs time to process this. Let's just take a breath. He looked at Eleanor, then at Melanie. Eleanor nodded, her own emotions a turbulent storm. She gently squeezed Clara's hand. I'll be back, sweetheart. I promise. Clara gripped her hand, her eyes pleading. I want you to. We have 15 years to catch up on. The quiet sincerity in Clara's voice was a balm to Eleanor's wounded soul. Eleanor stepped out of the room, leaving Daniel with Clara. Melanie followed her, her face a mixture of anger and desperation. Eleanor, we need to talk about this. You can't just— Not now, Melanie. Eleanor cut her off, her voice firm, unwavering. She turned to face Melanie in the brightly lit hospital hallway. I've kept your secrets for 15 years. I think I've earned a moment's peace. And with that, Eleanor turned and walked away, leaving Melanie standing alone. As she moved down the corridor, a strange, liberating lightness settled over Eleanor. The messy, painful truth was finally out. The weight of silence, of the unspoken burden, had finally lifted. 1 year later, the crisp autumn air of Central Park carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant murmur of city life. Eleanor sat on a bench, a soft wool shawl wrapped around her, a gentle smile playing on her lips. 6 months ago, she had finally made the move, settling into a cozy apartment just a few blocks from Clara and Daniel in New York. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was a text from Clara. Hey, Grandma. Just picked up Michelle from daycare. See you soon. A simple message, yet it filled Eleanor with a warmth that spread through her chest. Regular communication, inclusion, a genuine connection. It was everything she had yearned for. The days following Clara's surgery had been difficult, fraught with raw emotion. Melanie, in a desperate attempt at damage control, had tried to minimize, to deflect, to once again spin a narrative. But Clara, hurt and betrayed, had insisted on knowing the full truth, every painful detail. Daniel, to Eleanor's surprise, had been her unwavering ally. He listened patiently, his quiet support a stark contrast to Melanie's frantic denials. He understood the profound value of family connections, a value Melanie had so carelessly discarded. Eleanor had spent months grappling with her own feelings, understanding Melanie's motivations, a cocktail of grief, a need for control, and a desire to completely recreate her life after Michael's death, if not entirely forgiving them. A familiar sight brought a wider smile to Eleanor's face. Clara and Daniel were approaching, pushing a stroller. As they drew closer, Daniel carefully lifted out a tiny, giggling bundle. It was Michelle, their 7-month-old daughter, named after Eleanor's own beloved mother. Michelle, with her bright, curious eyes, was just beginning to take her first wobbly steps. Eleanor reached out, her heart swelling as Michelle was placed in her arms. The baby's soft weight, her tiny fingers grasping Eleanor's, was a feeling Eleanor had thought she would never truly experience again. Being a recognized, cherished presence in her great-granddaughter's life. "Grandma, guess what?" Clara's voice was bright, filled with an infectious excitement. The first round of Morrison Foundation scholarship recipients were announced today. "Daniel and I are so proud." She paused, then corrected herself with a playful smile. "Well, the Hayes Foundation now. We finally got the paperwork through." Eleanor's eyebrows rose in surprise and warmth. Clara and Daniel had been quietly working on establishing a foundation. Funded primarily by an inheritance Daniel had received from a distant relative, the Eleanor Hayes Foundation provided scholarships for medical students committed to working in underserved communities. It was Clara's way of honoring Eleanor's sacrifice. A living legacy. The past year had seen so many changes. Clara had distanced herself from Melanie's suffocating control, choosing instead to nurture her new family. Weekly dinners at Eleanor's apartment became a cherished tradition, filled with laughter and, sometimes, quiet, tearful questions about Michael, about Eleanor's lost years, about the truth. It was a rebuilding. Brick by painful brick. Clara and Daniel had explicitly asked Eleanor to move closer, wanting their children to know their great-grandmother, to grow up with the love and wisdom Eleanor had been denied giving them. Melanie, predictably, had reacted poorly to these shifts. There had been attempts at guilt trips, angry outbursts, then tearful apologies that felt hollow and insincere. Eventually, she had retreated to Connecticut, the distance a welcome relief for everyone involved. Clara mentioned Melanie was now dating a retired professor, and Eleanor, to her own surprise, found herself genuinely wishing Melanie well. Perhaps she, too, was finding a new path. However, belatedly. "The foundation board wants you to speak at the spring gala, Grandma," Clara announced, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. Eleanor hesitated. Public speaking was not her forte, and she was still uncomfortable with the spotlight after years in the shadows. "Oh, I don't know, dear. I'm not really one for speeches." Clara shook her head, her eyes firm. "No, Grandma. You have to. Those students should know the story behind their scholarships. How one person's sacrifice can change so many lives." Eleanor looked down at Michelle, gently stroking her soft hair. "I never saw it as sacrifice, Clara," she said quietly, her voice imbued with a deep, enduring love. "Not for you. It was love, because you were worth it." Clara's eyes glistened, mirroring Eleanor's own. "I know that now," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It took me so long to understand. After being told a different story for so long." Eleanor met Clara's gaze, a lifetime of understanding passing between them. "The past is past," she said, a gentle release in her voice. "What matters is now. This moment." Michelle, sensing the shift in tone, playfully lunged for Daniel's coffee cup, bringing a burst of laughter that broke the tender moment. The sound of their shared joy was a melody to Eleanor's ears, a symphony of normalcy and belonging. Walking through the park, pushing Michelle's stroller alongside Clara and Daniel, Eleanor felt the label absent grandma no longer mattered. It held no power over her. Clara knew the truth. Michelle would grow up knowing her, surrounded by her love. And Michael's legacy, Eleanor's unwavering love, lived on through the foundation, touching countless lives. Eleanor recognized that true love, given without expectation, eventually, inevitably, finds its way to the surface, breaking through layers of deceit and neglect. "Dinner at our place tonight, Grandma?" Clara asked, linking her arm through Eleanor's. Eleanor's reply was immediate, full of only joy. "I wouldn't miss it." Finally, truly present in the golden autumn of her life, surrounded by the family she had fought so hard for, Eleanor found her peace.